Today's guest is Summer Mersinger, CEO of the Blockchain Association and former commissioner at the CFTC. Before her appointment by President Biden, she served as a senior congressional staffer, including as an advisor to now Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Summer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. We always ask our guests this first question. What does crypto in America mean to you?
It means exciting new technology that's going to make over our entire financial services system. This is going to be the technology that takes us into the next century. And yeah, it's just remarkable what we're able to do on the blockchain.
Yeah, for sure. We've had a lot of guests on talking about that too. And Summer, I'd love to get a little bit of a rundown on your background. I know Eleanor talked about kind of the previous roles you had, but you were an advocate of digital assets throughout your time at the CFTC. And before that, you grew up on a farm in South Dakota, then went on to earn a law degree from Catholic University, spent many years in Congress. How did that ultimately lead you to crypto?
Very roundabout way. And actually, people ask me all the time, how did I end up at the CFTC as a commissioner? And I always say my dad's a farmer and my mom was a banker. So it just made sense that I ended up at the CFTC. But yeah, I kind of handled financial services policy for Senator Thune, and handling that, you kind of kept up with technology. I worked for a lobbying firm for a while, and we had a lot of fintech clients, and that was really when crypto started to make an appearance on the main stage. So I was active there. And when I got to the CFTC working under Chairman Tarbert, he was kind of the original one who said, we need legislation. We need a bill. So worked very closely with Capitol Hill, trying to get, at least an initial start on some sort of legislation that would kind of help market structure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, during your time at the CFTC, obviously saw a lot in the digital asset space, both good and bad, from the various regulatory agencies and the waves of enforcement. So, obviously Say Labs is a member of the Blockchain Association. We were very excited to see you land there and excited for all the work you're doing now on this side of things. When you were thinking about leaving the CFTC, what drew you to the BA specifically? You must have had a lot of options. So I'm curious about what going to a trade, coming from your role was like.
I knew I wanted to be really involved in the process I saw playing out in the administration and Congress around digital assets. And I think, it just timing was perfect, where BA was looking for a new CEO and I was looking to jump into the fray on digital asset legislation and policy in general. And so it kind of just lined up that way. And, I'm very good at working with Congress, working to find areas of compromise, trying to bring people together behind various policies is something I have a lot of experience with. And I wanted to be able to bring that to this industry. And there was no better place to do it than here at the Blockchain Association.
Summer, what's been your craziest story or most interesting aspect, I guess, from coming from government into this insane world of crypto?
I think some of my crazier stories were actually when I was at the CFTC. I used to always kind of joke about going to some of these crypto events and being on overstimulated with the lights and the fog machines and stuff. And then going back to our very boring government building. It was, kind of stark difference. But, as far as since starting here, every week I thought it can't get any crazier, it can't get any busier, and it did. I started my first day on Capitol Hill doing a staff briefing. We had a policy summit right after that, and then shortly thereafter I got called up to the Senate Banking Committee to testify. shortly after that, the House Ways and Means Committee asked me to testify. Actually, originally they had this scheduled for the same day, and I had to assure them I couldn't be in two places at once. So the House had to reschedule their hearing to make sure that I could be a part of that. So it's just been a wild ride since I've started.
Is there any similarities between, your past job as a commissioner and now being a CEO of the Blockchain Association? I'm not sure there is, but no. I'm curious.
I mean, certainly a lot of the players there's a lot of overlap. There are a number of, digital asset companies that have entered the CFTC space. They have registrations. You're seeing more and more really look at the CFTC markets as a good place to operate. So there are a number of players that I knew at the CFTC that I still get to work with here at the BA. Certainly, it's a very different pace. Being a commissioner, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of thinking, writing. There's no time to read anything. We are going constantly. So I would say definitely the pace has been busier. I compare it more to working in the Senate, but yeah, I would say the biggest kind of crossover, what prepared me most for working at BA was really, getting to know some of the players in this space and what was most important to them and what they needed to see from government policy to really, to see this industry excel.
Yeah, one of the more unique features about your experience is that you just mentioned you worked under a Republican, now Senate Republican majority leader, and were appointed by the Biden administration. And I think one of the things that our industry faces is a heavy criticism or tilt towards like partisanship. Obviously, one of the missions of BA is to be very bipartisan or nonpartisan in their approach to crypto. How do you think about that experience? Like, what was it like to be in that sort of situation and kind of cross the aisle, so to speak, from an employment standpoint? And then how do you at BA now approach sort of the bipartisan or nonpartisan nature of the industry?
I was trained under a member of Congress who was very bipartisan. I worked for Senator Thune when he was a congressman. And at that time, so South Dakota is an at-large state, so there's only one member of Congress. So it was Republican member of Congress and two Democrat senators. And so I learned from Thune that you have to work across the aisle. You have to come together. You've got to find compromises or nothing will get done. So that's always been how I approach policy. And, the nomination process is very interesting. So while I was a Biden appointee to a Republican seat, my name actually got to the Biden office through former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's office. So it's kind of a roundabout way how they send the names up. So when it's the opposite party, the majority leader or whoever, majority or minority leader for that party in the Senate will pick their nominees and then send those on to the White House. But, the CFTC is a very bipartisan agency as well. The issues there really kind of cover, they're nonpartisan issues. And so you have to work closely with your fellow commissioners. And I often would say that I probably was more, worked more and more aligned with Christy Goldsmith Romero sometimes just because of, we worked really well together in a bipartisan way.
Summer, I want to get your thoughts on what's going on at the CFTC right now. I think it's no secret that the agency is operating on what some might call a skeleton crew. We have Acting Chair Caroline Pham, who has been pretty public about the fact that she wants to step down when a new chair is confirmed. We just had Kristen Johnson very recently come out and say she's going to leave on September 3rd, which will literally mean that Caroline is the only commissioner at the agency. So I want to ask you, what do you think is taking the White House so long to come up with nominees, I guess, to replace you, to replace Russ Benham, Christy Goldsmith Romero? Do you think we'll see some nominations anytime soon?
That's a great question. I would say that this administration probably is not a fan of bipartisan commissions. I think that's, something that we've seen. I don't know if there are people being vetted for these seats. I haven't heard anything, about people being vetted. So, without bipartisan kind of pairings for the commissioners, that's usually how they do it. They send up a Democrat and a Republican at the same time. It makes it easier to go through the Senate, without kind of doing this all together, having, the Democrats and the Republicans going up to the Senate together. I don't know how these seats get filled. So it really is kind of a question of, what does the administration prioritize? What are their views on both independent agencies and independent agencies run by bipartisan commissions, and how they, see that those agencies, how they're going to operate moving forward. And I think there's just a lot of questions there about what the White House wants to do with a bipartisan commission like the CFTC.
Mm-hmm. It's my understanding that you need a quorum in order to get any major initiatives done at the CFTC. Does that mean at least 2 commissioners have to be in seats in order to get voting done?
So actually, the Commodity Exchange Act does not require a quorum. The SEC, under their authorizing statute, they are required to have a quorum, but there's no quorum requirement at the CFTC. So I think there has been some kind of legal discussion around whether or not the agency can operate with just one chairman or commissioner. I think you see something similar at the Credit Union Administration. And, it's kind of risky because you can probably move policy forward. You can probably vote on litigation and moving forward with enforcement cases. But, somebody somewhere is probably going to question that in court. So I do think, the commission works best when it has a quorum, and certainly anything that comes out of the commission is legally more sound when there is a quorum of commissioners at the agency. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage this time of one person.
Summer, I also want to get your take on something that I'm sure you thought we would be asking you about, but what's going on with the CFTC leadership right now and the ongoing uncertainty around Brian Quintence's nomination?
Well, I think there was some, kind of misinformation out there that crypto was divided on support for Brian. We had just sent out a letter last week showing broad support from the industry for Brian, urging the White House to move him ahead. I think there was a short pause, but from everything I've seen and heard, I think they are going to, push ahead with Brian. I think he's the right person for that job. I think that they do need to get him there. So I think we'll see in early September, some movement on Brian's nomination. But I think it was just kind of a temporary blip in the system where there was just, some people raising questions. But those questions have been kind of tamped down, and Brian really is the right choice for the crypto industry.
Bitcoin might sound complicated, but the Gemini credit card makes it simple. Use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. No annual fee, and right now you can grab a $200 Bitcoin intro bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stash. Go to Gemini.com/CIA to learn more. Terms apply.
What do you think about how the impact of Brian's absence and sort of the skeleton crew at the CFTC that you and Eleanor alluded to impacts, like by contrast, the very robust sort of nature of the SEC coming out in force on this issue for crypto? Like we saw Chair Atkins out in Wyoming, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But it seems like if we're talking about sort of quorum and the way rules are made on one side of things, the way that could impact spot markets, perps, things like that. we really seem to be leaning on the SEC to do a lot of this sort of legwork and lifting. Do you think that's like an approach that the BA or you support, or, where do we kind of go from here?
Yeah, I do think, with the kind of skeleton staff and down to, we'll be down to one commissioner, I do think the CFTC risks losing ground here. The SEC is in full force. They have come out strong with the crypto task force, with Atkins' speech. They're kind of all in on, managing this space. And I think, at the end of the day, for this association and our members, we just want legal certainty. So however that we get that, I think that's what we support. So, if the SEC can provide some legal certainty, so that the industry can continue to innovate, if they can provide sandboxes for, new ideas and new technology in blockchain space to operate, we are going to be fully supportive of that. Now, with administrative actions, you do always have to worry about those being overturned when a new administration comes in. And I think that's why having a market structure bill is so important, because we need this signed into law so that there's not the opportunity for an incoming chairman down the road who will overturn any rules that the SEC works on during this time.
With legislation, obviously, market structure calls for a much broader role for the CFTC to play in crypto oversight, specifically with digital commodities. What additional resources would the CFTC need to effectively regulate the spot market without sort of overregulating, if you know what I mean? I feel like, because right now the agency's budget is $400 million compared to the SEC's. Yeah, I was always blown away by this number when I did the comparison. The SEC's budget is $2.6 billion. So obviously a big difference there. In your view, what's a realistic estimate to get oversight right without overregulating?
Yeah. So I've always been on the kind of, and I might be kind of the lone voice here, that the agency can do a lot without additional resources. Certainly I don't think anyone's going to complain if Congress increases their, the CFTC's appropriations. They can always hire, more kind of technical expertise. But as far as being able to step up and regulate the spot market, I think the agency is ready. If you think about it, they've been overseeing the futures contracts on a lot of the spot cryptocurrencies since 2018. So they've been watching these markets. They've been surveilling these markets. They they're experts in this space. And I really do think they can step in and do the job, even if there's not a huge influx of additional appropriations. I do know that Congress would like to see more resources for the agency. So they have looked at ways to see if there's, maybe some fees that could be, instituted, kind of like the SEC has, they get a lot of their budget from their fees. But it's an interesting space. There's a lot fewer players in this space. And so I think anything that would be a fee would probably either really be excessive given the small number of participants, or just, give a small uptick in the budget for the agency. So it's tough to, it's tough to put a number on what they would need, but I'm actually of the view that they could do this today with what they have, and, do it well.
Do you ever see a world in which the two agencies, the CFTC and the SEC, gets merged?
Not as long as the Senate Ag Committee and House Agriculture Committee exist. The CFTC will be a separate agency. That would take an act of Congress, and the two agriculture committees are not going to let go of that jurisdiction. They have fought hard to ensure they had jurisdiction. Dodd-Frank was kind of split up because all the CFTC work had to go through the Agriculture Committee. So, the the members on both sides of the aisle and the House and Senate Agriculture Committee are really true kind of champions for the agency, and I think are willing to fight to keep the CFTC around and not merge with the SEC. I think the other thing people talk about, like in other countries where they have the kind of the market regulators as one versus, the way we often get, other countries saying it's so odd that you guys have this split. And my answer is always like, well, guess where the most robust and, vibrant capital markets are? They're in the US. So I think we got it right. I don't think it happens. But people do love to talk about it. And anytime there's an opening, and I think some of the uncertainty around, the appointments and the chairmanship have given people that opportunity to start talking about it again.
Yeah, those discussions always come up, I feel like. You also brought up the Senate Ag Committee and the Banking Committee. Are you kind of satisfied with how closely they are working together, or what are your thoughts on that front?
Yeah, listen, the two sides have to start working together in order for this to get across the finish line. You can't just have, separate products come out of the House and the Senate and just assume that they're going to be able to have this conference committee and come out with a bill that everyone's okay with. I think that there's not enough time to do that. And I just think that there's really not a world anymore in Congress where you see these conference committees where, they kind of battle it out between the House and Senate. I think from what I've heard, they are working closely together now. I think they all met during the break. They kind of went over their shared goals. And I think they recognized that the House did a lot of really good work on clarity, that they had broad support. And, maybe you don't need to reinvent the wheel on the Senate side. So I think those are good discussions to have. It gives me a lot of hope that we could see something get across the finish line before the end of the year.
I don't know if you all have noticed this recently, but Avalanche has been on a roll. From FIFA launching their own Layer 1 on Avalanche, to VanEck unveiling the purpose-built fund to back ecosystem projects, the world is watching and building on Avalanche. Web3 gaming? Avalanche-based titles like MapleStory and Off the Grid have it covered. Finance? Avalanche has got that down pat too. Entertainment? Built for that as well. On top of that, starting in 2026, Sports Illustrated Stadium will be the first major sports venue to fully adopt blockchain ticketing powered by Avalanche. Backed by a strong network of builders and dedicated community, the momentum is accelerating on Avalanche for games, music, sports, finance, and more. Want to see how Avalanche is driving adoption? Go to avax.network and check it out.
Do you get a sense that the ag Dems in the Senate are a little bit more receptive than the banking Dems? I mean, we don't have an Elizabeth Warren on the ag Dem side, but we do have an Amy Klobuchar, for example, but she seems to be much more willing to work in a bipartisan way, except I actually think I heard that the bill that they're coming up with over the break, their discussion draft, they wouldn't work on it unless it was bipartisan. So Bozeman and Klobuchar together. Do you get the sense that they're just much more sort of in line with each other? Maybe more of a well-oiled machine when it comes to the bipartisan side of things?
I think the agriculture committees tend to be more bipartisan given the policy that they cover. So setting aside the CFTC, when you're looking at farm programs, you're looking at some of the food aid, all of those tend to be very bipartisan issues where they have to work together. In fact, sometimes with agriculture, it's a more regional fight than it is Republican or Democrat. So I think they're just used to working more closely and always kind of, not going it alone, always trying to work with their Democrat counterparts. Senate banking is interesting. You do have Elizabeth Warren at the top, but you're seeing more and more, kind of the down dais members, as they would say, really starting to, look at crypto as embrace kind of this idea that we need a market structure bill and we needed the genius. And, we're doing a lot of education meetings and we have great reception from, both sides of the aisle. But yeah, I really think if you look at some of the folks, I bring up also Brooke, she's got a great kind of case study of how Baltimore has used digital assets. So I think, putting Elizabeth Warren aside, I do think Senate Banking has some Democrat members who are willing to work on legislation and willing to compromise.
Yeah, I want to go back to that flurry of activity that was Crypto Week that resulted in Genius and Clarity, right? I know we're talking about bipartisan support. Both of those bills did end up having pretty strong bipartisan support coming out of the House. I believe there were 78 Dems who signed on to Clarity as it made its way through. But I think we still saw or heard some complaints from members on the Democratic side of the aisle there that they felt like they got steamrolled a bit or pushed around. And I know the industry and maybe even this administration to some extent are having trouble with kind of that concept. Do you see sort of more reconciliation or approach, whether it's through these education meetings or just more conversations between the industry and that side of the aisle kind of going into next year and obviously also just trying to get this bill through the Senate?
Yeah, I think some of those conversations on the House members feeling like they got pushed around or rolled had more to do with the fact that it was a Senate bill and not the House bill. Sometimes that can really, especially when both sides worked very hard. I know French Hill worked very hard on his version of the Stable Act. And so having to accept the Senate bill and not really, kind of accept it and move on. I think that probably caused a little bit of heartache for the House members who worked so hard on Stable. And certainly where there was, bipartisan support for Stable as well. I do think that everyone recognizes that this is a bipartisan issue. This needs to be bipartisan, and we have to be working with everyone. So, like I said, we've been in a lot of offices doing educational meetings, and a lot of them are Democrat offices who are very interested in our views on, one kind of just crypto 101, but also our views on market structure and what's most important in the bill. So I do think there's the will to work together. And I think the House, they were the first out with Clarity, and I think that's important, and I think that also gives them kind of a leg up. So hopefully they won't feel as jammed as they did on the Genius Act when it comes to market structure.
How is Blockchain Association specifically preparing to do the work around the regulatory implementation for the Genius Act and for market structure when it eventually passes?
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of our next big focus. Once we get done with this legislation, you've got to implement it and you've got to start working with the agencies. We're going in to meet with Treasury, to meet with the SEC, trying to build those relationships, build those kind of trust between the agencies and the association, get our members in to educate, where we can, and, just make sure that they understand that we are a resource, that we are ready to work with the agency, and that we can really help in the implementation stage of this. So a lot of it's just building relationships and making those contacts, ahead of time, kind of preemptively.
That must be interesting for you. I mean, is there any, I don't know if this is a rule when you become a CEO of a company, but do you have a cooling off period, so to speak, with your interactions with the CFTC?
Yeah, so I should have added I cannot talk to the CFTC for a year. Okay. So it gets really hard at different events where people I've been friends with for years are there, and we have to talk about like our kids or, the weather. It's small talk, even though we've known each other for ages, just because you definitely cannot talk about business before the CFTC. You cannot advocate on behalf of anyone in front of the CFTC for a whole year.
Yeah, I want to ask about some of the, I guess, interests of the members of the BA. Obviously you guys signed on, I believe SEC signed on as well to the letter from the DeFi Education Fund. So privacy has become a big concern, and protection for developers, speech as First Amendment right on the coding side. And then also I think DeFi trying to grapple with like how they implement some of these requirements sort of in a post-clarity world. How do you guys, we're obviously all very excited about the progress that we're making and the opportunities to knock on those doors and have those conversations. But how do you guys as an association deal with like sometimes the outcome being good for most, but, not great for everybody? Like, how do you guys navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to do. And, not everybody is aligned. And just because we come out in support of something doesn't mean that everybody agrees with us. It's kind of there's a delicate balance. It takes a lot of kind of, working directly with members, trying to understand their concerns, finding areas where we can weigh in on their behalf, and post some wins for different parts of the membership. But, I think the DeFi piece is, we've got a very vocal and active DeFi community in the BA, and that's great. And, I think we're trying to do what we can to make sure they don't unnecessarily get caught up in regulation. And, I do think that that's going to, be probably one of the deciding factors in, whether or not we can get market structure across the line, is if the DeFi community is satisfied with the language that's in the bill. So, but yeah, I think it's just a lot of talking through with various members. If there are concerns, I like to, talk one-on-one, say, what's the concern? How can we fix it? That's something I think I can bring to the table. Sometimes you can fix things without legislative language. So if it's, with the DeFi and the clarity, there was still some concerns around whether or not they would be subject to CFTC oversight. And so, they did a colloquy on the House floor reiterating that was not the intention of the language. So there are ways to kind of, help get the most important, goals of our members across the finish line. And it might not always be the legislative text. So that's why I, as much as I can work with members one-on-one, address their concerns and find solutions, that's what what we did for clarity and what I hope we can do with whatever comes out of the Senate.
You mentioned an active DeFi community. I think the biggest coalition of not just crypto companies, but also, traditional companies, tech alliances have all signed on to a letter that will be going off to Congress. And by the time this episode comes out, it will have gone to the Senate, basically saying we need protections for software developers in market structure. It's a big theme right now. Obviously, we've seen the big push around the Roman Storm trial, the Samurai Wallet case. And I'm just curious, we obviously have the BRCA, right, which the Senate Banking Committee has put into its market structure draft. It's in clarity. There's this big push, and I'm just curious to know what you think about how likely it is that we will get these protections that basically say, software developers are not subject to money transmitter laws, because we've got these big figures in the Senate like Mark Warner and Elizabeth Warren who are so hot on illicit finance and including KYC, AML in market structure. How much of a give and take are we going to see in this? Is crypto going to have to compromise, or are they going to win out on this?
I think for something to get across the finish line, it's going to have strong protections for DeFi. And I think part of that, part of the concerns around, this being somehow a loophole around anti-money laundering, or, the things you hear about concerns, with DeFi being kind of carved out of these legislations, it's kind of a fundamental misunderstanding. In my mind, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of DeFi. DeFi it's not a person. It's not a group of people. It's code. It's software developers. It's, people who are building a protocol, they're not breaking the law. Now, if somebody else breaks the law on their protocol, of course they should be held accountable. But as these developers are creating code and creating these protocol, that's really not a space that should have a financial regulator overseeing. So, kind of like we use the internet a lot as an example of this, where, if you create a website, or you create a platform like Facebook, when are you held liable for what's on your platform? And I think, trying to remind everyone that when we're talking about DeFi, we're talking about the technology and people building the technology, not some group that's looking for a carve out from regulation.
No, that makes sense. And we had Roman Storm on the podcast as well, and we talked at length with him on that topic. And so, I mean, for us, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of my co-host or you, but like, I do feel pretty strongly on that front too, where it's like, just because someone created technology and other people misuse it doesn't necessarily mean it's like malicious intent by any means, or it doesn't mean it in any way. Like, they created tech.
Yeah, exactly. So.
I'm curious on that notion of a lack of clarity on some of the implications of the activities of crypto more broadly, because there was a notion, I think, in that letter and then in other discussions where there's a compromise here for there needs to be an element of criminal intent. And if you have like a legal background, that makes sense. Intent is usually, kind of either established by precedent or, there are indicators of it, right? Whereas I think some of the activity in crypto could be a crime and could not be a crime, right? Like, do you think the only real solution there is, obviously we want those baseline protections, but even if we do get a protection like that, we're going to need a whole lot of case law to like kind of back it up. Like this goes beyond the legislation too, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think when you're talking about criminal statute, it's a little bit different than, the SEC and the CFTC have civil enforcement. So, some of this is making sure there's clarity around when they can bring a civil case against, a software provider or what have you. So, that's one of the areas where I think we really need clarity, and why we are kind of coming out so strongly that DeFi needs certain protections in legislation. Because again, it's the idea of you've got civil enforcement teams at these agencies who, often get to interpret the language the way they legally see fit. But yeah, I think this is new technology, so it's relatively new. So yeah, I mean, I think case law is developing, and we're seeing it develop now. And I think we'll continue to see it, but as much clarity as Congress can give is the best way to handle this, because, case law can always be overturned. And you can have divided, you can have different circuits believing different things. So it really is important to have the legislative certainty. And, there might be areas where, case law will build around the edges. But for the most part, we want to make sure that there is certainty that, if you in good faith are operating in a way that is within the law, that you're not going to have someone knocking on your door with a civil case or a criminal case.
I want to switch gears a little bit, Summer. We saw you last week, obviously, at the SALT conference out in Wyoming. Such a good time. Personally, it was my first time out there, and it's just beautiful. But we saw your your interview, post-speech with Governor Waller of the Fed. And I don't know, for me, it was just like, it was crazy to see, because last year the Fed was the bad guy, right? I think Anthony Scaramucci actually said publicly, he's like, last year we were actually trolling the Fed because, obviously the Fed Economic Symposium was a couple of days after. He's like, this year we actually invited Fed governors to come and be a part of the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. They are now part of the conversation. You sat down with Governor Waller after his speech. What kind of stood out to you the most from that talk that you had with him? And what has changed the most to you as someone who's been in government and has seen what the Fed has done with the industry, over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think when people think about the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve governors, they think of traditional finance. That's immediately where you go is, bank supervision and traditional TradFi, kind of that being their main focus. And people forget that, there's kind of an economic piece to this too. It's not all about regulating the financial system. So, crypto is becoming it's part of the economy. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And I think Waller said in his speech, there's nothing to be afraid of. And I thought that was a really good line because I think that is part of, what has happened in previous, with the previous administration is there was a fear of the unknown and, they were reacting to this lack of understanding. They were fearing the technology versus trying to understand it and embrace it. So, to see both Waller and Bowman be at SALT and participate and they were around for quite a bit too. I saw them around the area a number of times. So they were engaged, they were meeting with industry, and they were there to learn. And I think that was, it's such a stark contrast from where we were a year ago. It really is something that I think, people might not recognize how important it was to have the Federal Reserve involved with SALT, but it really was a big deal.
No, 100%. We also saw the SEC chair, Paul Atkins, walking around. I tweeted it and I was like, this is just so crazy. Like he's walking around like a normal attendee. He's not hiding in the speaker lounge. He's just talking to people. It's just such a difference from, maybe past chairs that we've had at the SEC. But it is a good thing. Yeah.
I feel like every meeting I went into, they would say, oh, I just sat down with Chairman Atkins we talked for an hour. And I was like, how does this man have so much time on his hands?
How many hours does he have?
Yeah. I mean, he did a ton of meetings there and really impressed. And everyone felt very heard. They felt like he understands. All I heard was positive, kind of feedback from people's interactions with Chairman Atkins, at SALT. Everyone was over the moon with excitement around his chairmanship. So I think that's great. And yes, I think he has more energy than I do because I was like retired by 5 p.m. I think he was still meeting with people.
Yeah. The social battery runs out eventually for everyone at these conferences.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How would you kind of describe the state of the industry right now? And, with the event in mind, what about it showcased that? I felt a lot of energy there. I think, me and my co-host can agree on that, but it also felt like a lot of momentum. And it's a very stark difference than maybe perhaps the last Wyoming blockchain symposium from a year ago before President Trump took office. I was not at the event, but that's what I was told by a lot of attendees. I'm curious, how would you kind of describe the state of it?
Yeah, it's very optimistic. I think industry generally is, ready to, step up, be more, involved in all areas of the economy and, really kind of build, be the builders, be the small businesses, be the job creators of this economy. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of optimism, certainly the momentum, I could feel that from the day I walked in the door here, that there was so much momentum behind the industry and what we're trying to accomplish on a policy side. So, you could feel that in SALT. You could kind of feel the excitement. People were happy. I saw a lot of smiling faces. Maybe it was because we had such a beautiful backdrop in Wyoming, but I also think it was just the state of the industry where people they're very optimistic. They're feeling good about the future.
Yeah, it could have had something to do with ETH chasing that all-time high too, right? But that's a different subject for a different podcast. So I'm curious on the Fed piece of it. One of the conversations that we had out there as well was with Anthony Apollo of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. They announced officially the day the conference kicked off I think they're calling it Flint, the token that they're launching with a handful of chains. Very interesting application of law and sort of banking law and sovereignty of the states. And then this week we actually also saw the EU announced, and they had put out sort of an RFP on this quite a while ago, I believe it was in the fall, but announced that they were going to explore working with, I think it was Solana and Ethereum on their own sort of stable token. Do you think the Fed pays attention to that in like a special kind of way, or it's an interesting kind of novelty application of the technology? Like, where do you think their involvement, or obviously not speaking for the Fed, but how do you think they perceive that?
I think they're probably watching closely. I always say the states are kind of the real sandboxes for policy. So, seeing states get involved, issuing stable coins, that really is going to be kind of a test case for, how this could work, in the United States. There's always the question of whether or not, the Fed will try to issue a stable coin. And there's certainly a lot of concern and pushback. And, I always say when people talk about it, I'm like, ask how Fed now went, faster payments. Fed is not a technology provider, and they shouldn't be. So I think, having them remember that they are regulators, are not technology providers. They shouldn't be in that space. They shouldn't compete with the private sector. Hopefully they're keeping that in mind as they see kind of some of these test cases for stable coins in other places.
Summer, as we wrap up here, just want to go back to BA a little bit, just because, you are in your, let's say, when did you take the helm at BA?
June 1. June
okay.
1, so I'm almost at 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy 3-month anniversary.
Yeah, thank you. It's felt like 3 years. It's been so busy.
Welcome
Are
to
you
crypto.
making any changes at BA?
Really, I'm not. This is a great team. They are motivated. They're smart. They've been in this space. They are very dedicated to the industry, and I just am lucky that I was able to kind of step in and pick up where Kristen Smith left off. She built this association. She built this team, and I'm able to really just kind of step in and do what needs to be done. So, not making changes. The only thing that may be a little bit different is I really am trying to push for a unified voice, trying to get everyone to speak kind of with one voice, not fight it out publicly. We can have these conversations behind scenes, but, let's try to be we're stronger if we're a unified voice when we're dealing with, kind of publicly. And so that is one of the things I'm really trying to, focus on if, from this position, is getting folks to understand the importance of having a unified voice for crypto.
Yeah, I think it's obviously super important for you guys, especially just on a membership basis, like, rowing in the same direction we kind of talked about. It's definitely sort of the golden age of digital assets, but it may also be the golden age of digital asset advocacy groups. And I'm wondering, there was some, I guess it seemed like in the previous administration, maybe there was more competition between groups, or there was just different relationships. And now it seems like, I know, there are several industry players who are members of, multiple associations, or are working with various groups, or doing their own thing in addition to what they're doing. How do you guys see working with other groups like the Chamber or CCI, or it's a long list of great folks out there. But like, how do you see it as a more collaborative world now, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. The three kind of main trades, CCI, Digital Chamber, and BA, kind of all had a leadership change at the same time. So that really, I think we feel a kinship with each other because we all started at the same time. We're all new to running an association. But I also think there's recognition that if we're going to get something done, we've got to work together. We can't compete. And, everybody recognizes that, the most important thing, we have a short small window here. We got to get a lot done. And again, if we have the trade associations bickering, that's not going to help anyone. So I think there is also that recognition that we have got to work together to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. But yeah, Cody at Digital Chamber and G at CCI, we've all become friends. And, it was kind of like immediately meeting each other. We recognized like, oh, we're all going through the same, kind of trial by fire here, and, kind of build some kinship.
Do you see any consolidation in the trade space, Summer?
I don't think so. There's room for all of us. That's what I always say. We have kind of different missions. CCI is international. They have the international piece in addition to some of the domestic policy. We are pretty much focused on domestic policy. We have our membership is crypto native, has to be crypto native. So, you may see other associations maybe taking some of the TradFi players who are getting into the crypto space as members, but that doesn't really qualify for membership at the BA. So I think there's room for all of us. And I don't think that, I think it would be very hard to merge any of the trades together.
I know we're wrapping soon, and I know this is a very official policy podcast, but you guys at the trades are also creating the next generation of crypto policy leaders. So I have to give a shout out. Cody, he's a neighbor. He's on paternity leave right now. So congrats to him. I know Allie Page from your team is looking at going out on maternity leave soon. So yeah, next generation out there coming up. It's great.
There's been a lot of crypto babies lately. So yeah. It's amazing. We have these blockchain association onesies, and I'm worried we're going to run out because there's been so many babies.
Yeah, that's
amazing. I love that.
It's because of the good climate. People feel, comfortable now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So
secure future. Yeah.
It's great. I mean,
yeah.
I tell the staff, I'm like, it's your turn to I brought 4 children into this world. So I'm like, it's your turn to populate the earth now. So it's great seeing our staff, families grow. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what matters the most.
For sure. Future crypto policy. Yep. Future. Yeah. Last thing, Summer, we always like to end with, aside from everything we've discussed, what is something that you're paying attention to in DC or in general that you think others should also watch?
Yeah, one of the things that I would like us to spend a little more time on and focus on is kind of this narrative that I think it's a false narrative around energy consumption and mining. I think there's a lot of benefits to the Bitcoin mining that's going on. My home community has a Bitcoin miner that moved in, and they've seen, revenue for the school and for public works, just increase just because of one business. So I think changing this narrative around Bitcoin mining being bad to there's a lot of good. You can actually, there's some, if the way they can operate when, outside of peak hours, really can help, with the transmission of electricity. And that's something I would, I want to see us talk about more. And I think, we'll see kind of come up more in Washington is this idea of putting away this idea that somehow mining was going to ruin the environment and looking at the actual benefits that it brings to both the energy sector and the communities that they're in.
Yeah, for sure. We actually have an episode coming up soon, top secret, but it's on the mining front. So our listeners can keep an eye out for that. But Summer, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, this was great.